They took out ads against me specifically all over the Austin area, all over Facebook. You know how you see suggested posts accusing me of being a radical jihadist.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City. On the internet at thestruggle.org. Our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. On a recent program, we had video from Aleppo, Syria, after an attack on a hospital. The reporter was Hadi Abdallah. The Syria Project released this video about him after he was injured in an Assad barrel bomb attack.
Khaled! صوبت براسي يا خالد!
A day or two after the barrel bomb attack, Hadi Abdallah and Khaled Essa were seriously injured in an assassination attempt with an IED in Aleppo. At this writing, they are both alive. Joe Cox was a first-term Labour Party MP who was a member of the Labour Friends of Palestine and a passionate supporter of the Syrians struggling against the Assad tyranny. She opposed British bombing in Syria and at the same time spoke for breaking the sieges and even called for establishment of a no-fly zone in Syria. Here she is at a river protest against a right-wing led attempt to take the UK out of the European Union. Cox was assassinated on June 15th by an apparent British neo-Nazi who shouted a nationalist slogan as he murdered her. Joe Cox, present. Now more at the Left Forum panel concerning Zionist slanders against Palestinians.
As David said, my name is Mohammad Nabulsi. I'm a law student at the University of Texas School of Law, and where I participate in a lot of organizing on campus. And so I'm here to speak to the experience of organizing on campus and how accusations of anti-Semitism affect our work on campus. And so before I get into it, can I get just a gauge the audience? How many of you are familiar with the campus work as it relates to Palestine activism? Familiar with the campus work as it relates to Palestine? Yeah, SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine. Okay, so I'll varying degrees of detail in terms of the types of activities that we engage in, but just generally speaking, Students for Justice in Palestine, or as we're known at UT Austin, Palestine Solidarity Committee, engage in activities that promote BDS or support BDS through divestment initiatives, but also all kinds of other work. Depending on the politics of a particular SJP, that work can differ. And so, for example, PSC, Palestine Solidarity Committee, engages in a lot of anti-imperialist work on our campus and things of that nature. And so I'll be discussing some of the aspects of anti-imperialist work that demonstrate the inconsistency in accusations of anti-Semitism, or the incoherence of some of the accusations. And so again, I speak from the position of the South. I'm from Texas, so our experiences in terms of accusations of anti-Semitism differ from the East Coast or the Midwest or California. We are in a deeply conservative state. Even then, Austin is a liberal city within It's considered a blue island within a sea of red. But even then, the conservative atmosphere really shapes the way in which accusations are levied against Palestine activists. So you'll see that in some of the things that I talk about. And so, generally speaking, we have two types of accusations of anti-Semitism that arise. Public accusations of anti-Semitism and then private accusations of anti-Semitism. And each of the two work to do different things. And so, some of the public versions of anti-Semitism largely come from more of the right elements of the Zionist movement. And, they're like broad, vague, general claims about us being anti-Semitic tied to larger accusations of anti-Semitism leveled against the Palestine Solidarity Movement. And so, students will write op-eds against us, accusing us of inciting violence against Jewish students. They'll accuse us of supporting the murder of Jewish people. And so, while vaguely accusing someone of being anti-Semitic because of the content of their speech is obviously a problem, it's much different for us because the way that it works within the South and the way that works for us is that it ultimately constitutes inflammatory incitement. They're labeling us as, supporters of murder. I've actually been described by an Israeli professor at the university as a supporter of murderers. And then the private end of things. And this is where I think more liberal Zionists tend to navigate, especially within the South. And this is like behind closed doors. Our local Hillel, Texas Hillel, really engages in, emails or calls to the departments or calls to student organizations. So for example, Palestine Solidarity Committee has developed a strong connection with the Black student community and the larger Black Austin community because of the work we do around Black Lives Matter and police brutality and various other matters that concern students on campus, Black students on campus. And so early on, when we first started to do the Ferguson to Palestine events, our Hillel would reach out to student organizations and tell them they're worried about their affiliation with our group or our interactions with our group because of concerns for anti-Semitism broadly. Not specific instances of anti-Semitism, and this is before any event has taken place. So this is describing concerns about an event that's supposed to take place in the future. And so one specific instance, 2 years ago, we hosted a Ferguson to Palestine event. We organized it with 3 Black student groups, the Pre-Law National Black Law Student Association, the Association for Black Psychologists, and the Black Student Alliance. And unlike a lot of other campuses, our Black Student Alliance isn't very politically active, but it engages from time to time in Black issues. Well, we organized this event about 3 weeks, and 2 days before the event, we're approached by the Black student organizers and say, look, we've been approached by Texas Hillel and they're concerned for anti-Semitism at your event. And I'm like, wait a minute, do they even know the content of the event? What exactly about the event is anti-Semitic? And they're like, we're not sure, but they said that they're concerned. And we explain, it's really hard to explain to people who aren't seasoned as it relates to Palestine, like what anti-Semitism accusations are or what they work to do. And so, understandably so, these Black students were concerned. This accusation was heavy and they wanted to make sure that they weren't associated with any sort of racism. And so, you try to explain to them, like, look, this is a tactic, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, one of the student groups, the Black Student Alliance, pulled out the day before of the event, complete sponsorship. And they told us it was because of, tactical things, organizational problems. But it was clear. I mean, it was too much of a coincidence. And so, in other forms of private, we have a campus climate report system where you report hate crimes or what they describe as bias incidents. We get a lot of reports if you look at the data about us making students unsafe on campus. We put up an apartheid wall. The wall, which is just filled with nothing but information, is said to be making students unsafe on campus. And then the accusation of anti-Semitism is so prevalent within the activist spaces that recently a Black student was walking in West Campus. This area is like a fraternity concentrated, one of the more rowdy like fraternity, drunkenness, aspects of our campus living. And he had a bottle thrown at him, and he was, there were racial epithets thrown at him, and, like literally champagne bottles thrown at him, and it was by UT students. And so the administration didn't do much for a few months about it, and eventually released some lukewarm statement and said that they were investigating the students, blah, blah, blah. And it turned out that the university didn't have a hate conduct policy. So they didn't have a separate policy for disciplining students on the basis of hate. And so what they said was, okay, well, let's reach out to students, student activists, black students especially, and see like how can they help us, serve as an advisory board about developing some sort of policy. Well, one of the people that the black students reached out to was me. And it was me, not because we had experienced a tremendous amount of Islamophobia and anti-Arab racism. I mean, I'll get to that, the amount of hate that we've experienced. But because they were worried that this policy would be used against us. I mean, this is the extent to which these people have come to understand that the institution will mobilize even the most, righteous of, policies or measures in order to suppress our activities on campus under the guise of, or under the name of anti-Semitism. And so, just to get an idea where it is. But it's also important to note that, for the South, anti-Semitism, like I said, doesn't work. The accusations of anti-Semitism doesn't work. We live within a really racist Southern society. And so people aren't really they don't care about accusations of anti-Semitism in the same way that they don't care about accusations of Islamophobia or anything like that. So it really like brushes off their ears. Now, this might seem like a weirdly positive development out of a negative aspect, but it's not. Because that means the accusations against us have to be even that higher, or that much, it has to appeal to the sensibilities of racist Southerners. So we actually face more accusations of terrorism, of being involved with terrorist activity, or sometimes people describe me as the radical jihadist communist. And I can't unpack the ideological inconsistencies there, but these are the types of things that we have to deal with. And so and this is especially levied by external groups like SJP Uncovered and Canary Mission. They took out ads against me specifically all over the Austin area, all over Facebook. You know how you see suggested posts accusing me of being a radical jihadist, accusing us of being a sleeper cell. And, the university was absolutely silent. And this was, I'm sorry, let me give you some context. We disrupted a Zionist event on our campus. And there was a video that went viral at one point. A professor called us, red flags for terrorism in a statement on a university website. And this ultimately resulted in, this fallout. And so what's happened for us is the accusation of anti-Semitism fell on deaf ears. Or if they do, they fall on, administrators do X, Y, and Z, but we have such a strong presence on our campus in terms of our organizing efforts that they're reluctant to really crack down on us in a way that might, bring our wrath. And so what these people instead resort to is these accusations of terrorism, and this is within the context of a campus that allows for concealed carry, and a campus that, you have this vigilante mentality that we need to protect ourselves from the Muslims, or we need to protect ourselves from creeping Sharia law, which is like, obviously within Texas, go to every city, you'll find some sort of politician talking about creeping Sharia law and how Muslims are infiltrating. And so, it's important also to note that we were accused of anti-Semitism and various things for this particular incident involving an Israeli professor that we disrupted, which was about the beginnings of the IDF, glorifying the beginnings of the IDF. Up until that point, we had disrupted four events, or 3 events that semester, 4 in the past year, none of which were Israel-Palestine related. They were Israel-Palestine related in our politics because they were targeting U.S. military establishment. So we disrupted an event by John Brennan, former CIA director. We disrupted one of the events of our chancellor, William McRaven, the former chair of JSOC. We disrupted well, I mean, one of them was Dagan, the former Mossad director. And so we consistently disrupt events on the basis of politics, clearly on the basis of politics. And we have clear articulated political lines as to why we disrupt events that promote U.S. imperial, U.S. imperial culture, or these are like recruitment events. And yet, when it came to this event, the university decided to say, wait a minute, free speech, academic freedom, anti-Israel sentiment, anti-Semitic sentiment possibly, even though this was about the IDF, even though if it was about, it was clearly about, the Zionist movement. And the only thing we wanted to do at this event was make a 2-minute statement at the beginning of the event talking about ethnic cleansing and talking about how ethnic cleansing cannot be excluded from this conversation about the beginnings of the IDF. And yet, obviously we experienced what we did. I'd be happy to open up the conversations to more to discussion later. But some of the key points that I want to put forward is part of the reasons that accusations of anti-Semitism exist, aside from the reasons that David articulated, is that they're unable. I mean, and this is obviously relates to the things that you said, but they're unable to engage with us politically. There's really, and this is, I mean, it's interesting. I wish we had stronger Zionist students because it makes us, I feel like, complacent at times, but they don't have good political understanding of the situation. They don't have a good understanding of Zionism. I think like we understand Zionism better than they do. And this is like, aside from the standpoint of Palestinians, what Zionism represents to us. I mean, from Zionism ideologically, the differences between political and cultural Zionism. These students don't even know these things. And so that's one of it. And so like when this comment about, the relentlessness of Palestinian advocates going against Israel. I mean, what a preposterous claim. This notion that Israel is being singled out and yet not recognizing who is doing the singling out. Like, who else would Palestinians want to end oppression? Like, the BDS call is another example. Like, and what should the Palestinians be saying exactly with the BDS call? That you should target Saudi Arabia? I mean, Saudi Arabia does not have its foot on the throats of Palestinians. And so like, this inability to recognize that Palestinians have legitimate political claims. And so, closing. A positive note, younger Jewish students are increasingly unconvinced by accusations of anti-Semitism against the movement. They don't buy it. And for a number of reasons. One, because of the frequency by which they occur, obviously, like, it gets to a point where, like, you keep hearing the same thing, and it's like, it's clearly about the politics and not about the racial question. The second is Jewish students are increasingly understanding themselves to be white. They experience the world as white people. And that means they're not really subjected to any sort of direct, immediate, and like racialized anti-Semitism. That's not to say that anti-Semitism doesn't exist, but I'm saying that a lot of Jewish students on our campuses don't, you sit down, you talk to them, and they're like, I really don't experience anti-Semitism. I experience anti-Israel sentiments. I experience anti-Zionist sentiments, but I really don't experience anti-Jewish sentiments. And lastly, or second to last, it's the unprincipled nature of these accusations. It's not as though these accusations of anti-Semitism are led by an anti-racist contingency within that community. It's often led by the most Islamophobic, racist, right-wing aspects of that community. So when these people levy these claims while at the same time supporting Islamophobia, it really doesn't reflect well on them because it's very inconsistent. It shows that it's not from a place of principle of anti-racism, but from a place of political disagreement. And finally, amongst Jewish students themselves, there is an incredible amount of political division. Like, you have, and this has been told to me by Jewish students, they often say, for every 2 Jews, there are 3 opinions. Well, they've said this to me as they stood in front of me arguing amongst their various political positions. And I'm like, look, y'all got to sort things out before y'all can come to me with a unified point, because you'll get some who disagree with settlements, some who disagree with checkpoints, some who support settlements, some who's talking about Judea and Samaria, some who are talking about, so there's so much political division amongst that community that these claims aren't registering by the progressive ends of those communities. They don't register. And so with that, I'll close and pass it on to Lemis.
As we were leaving the workshop, I saw a handsome banner displayed linking Armenia and Palestine. It was from activists doing the next panel. They were protesting Azerbaijan warfare on Armenians and Turkish government denial of the 100-year-old Armenian genocide. We had time for just a couple questions.
We only have a minute or two before you start your session, so could you explain these two pictures?
Okay, this is Turkish lies. They, in the United States, spent $200 million on denial of the Armenian genocide, and we have Eastern Turkey's really occupied Western Armenia. There are over 300 ancient Armenian villages that were totally depopulated. The Turks, skinned people alive, nailed them to crosses, sent them into death marches in the Syrian desert, and a third of the Armenian nation was killed just in a matter of years, and now there's Armenian refugees throughout the Middle East, Christian refugees that are being killed. And so this is their lies. They constantly tell lies, and we constantly try to tell the truth. So thank God for Struggle TV.
And one last thing, the banner you had, it had Armenia and Palestine. If you could just talk about that for a second.
It's called Armenian and Palestine Sisters in Struggles, because we both have occupied homelands, and the United States gives our taxpayers' money goes to fund money to Israel and also to Turkey, and they're both human rights abuses.
Thank you very much.
On June 15th, Albany, New York was the scene of a protest because of Governor Cuomo's executive order against BDS actions. A diverse coalition of nearly 200 Palestinian solidarity activists, civil liberties defenders, faith organizations, elected officials, anti-war groups, and more traveled from across the state to deliver a petition calling on Governor Cuomo to rescind the order. Mark Mishler, an activist with the Albany chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace, called Cuomo's action frightening, but was heartened by the size of the activists' pushback. Here is an inventive Code Pink protest in D.C. over the same issue. July 24th will be the day of a major climate march in Philadelphia, just before the Democratic Convention. It's an anti-fracking march. The issue of fracking is becoming the climate issue of our times. Here's from an article I wrote about this that'll be published this week. The politicians talk about the years 2100 and 2050, but we do not have that long to fix things. The esteemed climate scientist Robert Howarth spoke to 350 Connecticut recently and said his best estimate is that the world goes over 1.5 degrees Celsius in 13 years and over 2 degrees in 28 years. At those points, the feedback loops start and global warming gets completely out of control. The problem, therefore, is in the short run. To avoid the feedback loops, we now have to drastically reduce gases right now. God. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6. July 24th will be a major climate rally in Philadelphia. It'll be an anti-fracking march just before the Democratic Convention. The fight against fracking is turning out to be the climate fight of our times. I'm going to read from an article I wrote about this that should be published this week. The politicians talk about the years 2100 and 2050, but we do not have that long to fix things. The esteemed climate scientist Robert Howarth spoke to 350 Connecticut recently and said his best estimate is that the world goes over 1.5 degrees Celsius in just 13 years and over 2 degrees in 28 years. After those points, the feedback loops start and global warming gets completely out of control. The problem, therefore, is in the short run. To avoid the feedback loops, we need to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions right now. Unfortunately, we seem to be going in the wrong direction. The Obama administration has been happily pushing fracked natural gas as a bridge to the future, many decades from now, when we go to 100% renewable. As Howarth explains, this won't work. It won't work because natural gas in the critical short run is much worse than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. Natural gas is almost entirely the gas methane, and Howarth has calculated that the global warming effects of methane over a 20-year period are 105 times that of carbon dioxide. Philadelphia, July 24th. Join the thousands demanding an end to fracking. We must stop digging up deadly fossil fuel. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.